Hello everyone, my name is Nate, and I am here to present my final REHUGO project on fashion's influence on music in the early 2000s. So, as my research question on how did fashion influence music in the early 2000s, and the main reason why I decided to pursue this as my research question is because I found this topic very, very interesting and saw a stronger and stronger influence of the two on each other. So I decided I wanted to focus on particularly one of them and how one influenced the other. So, here's my table of contents, which gives a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is personal essays and blogs. I'm also going to talk about documentaries and films, fashion in our history through a timeline, podcast summaries from 2 podcast episodes, monumental moments from published research articles, and lastly, comics and cartoons that criticize the topic. So to start, personal essays and blogs. The article that I first researched was the 2000s, to focus fashion, which is fashion and rock music throughout the decades. And one of the most prominent styles that popped up during this time was known to be indie sleaze, which has a DIY club and edgy fashion to it, which is kind of seen as skinny jeans and band tees. And icons that popped up during this time that influenced this was the Strokes and LCD sound system. There's also a style known as mall goth, which just has a hot topic like fashion, and bands like Slipknot, which has a more nostalgic feel today. There's also a style known as professional punk, which has black shirts and red ties, which mainly came from Green Day, and with a mixed rebellion with a professional look. There's also a style known as skateboard punk, which had a simple, which band tees and jeans, which is directly linked to skating culture. And a style many people are familiar with is emo, which had a black/red outfits with heavy eyeliner, and there was a major influence by My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy. And lastly, the last style that popped up during the time was known to be indie folk, which had a vintage whimsical style, which were inspired by Juno and bands like Belle and Sebastian. And the second article I decided to look into was titled The Connection Between Music and Fashion Trends. And as stated previously, there is a major historical impact between the two, where music genres have historically defined fashion trends such as pop, punk, rap, and rock. There's also many prominent modern trends where we see current fashion often borrowing from music, and we can see that through pop culture using R&B and hip hop elements. There are a lot of icons and in our media that influence this. Firstly, being from music videos, films, and social media, which shape fashion's perception. Some examples being pop with their 1980s inspired outfits from the performances, and rock with brightly colored stage outfits from the Beatles. And lastly, there is also a major technological influence where social media and streaming platforms amplified the connection between music and fashion. So, some documentary and films that present this topic. So, one of the movies I decided to watch was The Devil Wears Prada, and the first point that it makes is that it highlights the high stakes fashion world by setting in a competitive environment of a runway magazine and explores the demanding and glamorous nature of the fashion industry. Some iconic fashion moments that popped up was Andy Sachs' transformation from a frumpy to fashionable, and it showcased high-end designer outfits and accessories that reflect the latest trends and styles in the fashion world. Some character wardrobes that popped up was firstly Miranda Priestley's, played by Meryl Streep, which is sophisticated with the powerful and sophisticated, which in a Piccoli style, which symbolizes her authority and perfection in fashion. And then Andy Sachs, played by Anne Hathaway, which started out with a simple and unrefined look, which then evolved into a chic and confident fashionista. And this film also gave a insight into the fashion industry by highlighting the behind the scenes look of the fashion magazine's operations, and highlights the creativity and pressure involved in fashion, and depicts the clash between personal style and professional expectations. Some cultural impacts that popped up was iconic outfits that have influenced real world fashion and portrays fashion as both an art form and a demanding career path. The second film I decided to watch was the BTS Permission to Dance on Stage documentary. And the first point I wanted to highlight was its music elements. So they opened with the song Dynamite, which sends a high energy tone. And then they played hit performances including Butter and Life Goes On, showcasing BTS's diverse musical range. It also showcased their vocal and choreography by showing their perfect synchronization and explosive energy. It also highlights sound and emotion by each song delivering powerful emotions and connecting deeply with the audience. Some fashion elements that popped up during this film, was their stage outfits with their stylish trend-setting attire for each performance. The coordination by matching and thematic outfits enhancing visual appeal. Variety, which mix of vibrant, casual, and sophisticated styles, and their iconic looks, which made it more memorable statements, contributing to the group's identity and performance impact. The next point I'm going to make is fashion in our history through a brief timeline. So, this is a fashion history timeline from 2000 to 2009. And as you can see in the early 2000s, there was a major influence of futuristic styles, known as metallics, black tones, and matrix inspired looks. And we can also see that there was a major influence because of the post 9/11 and financial crisis, specifically with a conservatism in fashion by having jeans as an everyday wear and which transitioning from low rise flared to skinny jeans. There was also distressed denim and bohemian styles, which is blending vintage pieces with designer wear. Some iconic fashion items that popped up during the time was the Galaxy dress by Roland Mouret, the Von Dutch trucker hats, and the Juicy Couture tracksuits. So some late 2000 trends that popped up was structured silhouettes, which inspired by the 40s and the 80s, and handmade clothing, which had a boho chic aesthetic, particularly post 2008 financial crash. Um, there was also a major celebrity influence on the time. So we can see that icons such as Paris Hilton, with her epitomize with the era's electric trends. There's also a major teen influence during the time with TV shows like Gossip Girl that drove major trends. Specifically in menswear, there's also a transition from futuristic to conservative like styles, which you can see more retro inspired style. And there was also an influence of indie rock and rap, where baggy jeans and basketball jerseys, skinny jeans, and hussar jackets popped up. As stated previously, there was a technological impact with the rise of fast fashion and online retail, as well as celebrity endorsements and collaborations being more common. There was also children and teen fashion being more prominent, as we can see, influenced by Disney and Nickelodeon stars, and teen fashion driven by TV shows and online platforms during the time. The next section I'm going to talk about is the podcast summary. So the series I decided to influence was the Business of Fashion podcast, and the episode was titled "Why Fashion, Media, and Entertainment Are Converging." And the host first talks about his early career, where he was a political staffer for President Bill Clinton, and where he gained exposure to diverse cultural and political figures. He also talked about his agency career, where he started at the Creative Arts Agency, and then transitioned to a United Talent agency. He also talked about his multi-field experience from working across politics, fashion, art, and media, and how he specifically focused on talent recruitment and representation. One of his most influential clients that he worked with was his name was Edward Einenfeld. He was an editor-in-chief of British Vogue, and he's recognized for his immense talent and visionary approach. He also talked about his strategic initiatives, where he expanded client platforms beyond traditional fashion and showcased how cultural figures can grow their brands with strategic talent representation. And he also highlights the impacts on fashion and music by showing how he helped clients and new audience with explore new audiences and opportunities and highlighted the intersection of fashion, music, and broader cultures. The next episode I wanted to highlight was What Fashion Can Learn from Music in Silicon Valley by Ian Rogers, same series. He first talked about the impact of the internet, where he revolutionized fashion and the music narratives and highlights the diverse cultural stories. He also talked about his experience in tech and fashion by insights from Silicon Valley and LVMH, and compares digital disruption in music and fashion. There's also a focus on cultural change, and where he embraced digital media and new innovations by highlighting its cultural awareness of tech changes and encouraged fashion trends to be more culturally sensitive, as well as urging investments in digital media and stressing the importance of innovation and targeting niche markets. He also talked about lessons he learned from the music industry, where he talked about how he learned that digital adaptation in music can guide fashion, and how he advocates for a cultural shift in fashion's digital evolution. Um, Next off, I'm going to talk about monumental moments from a research article. So, the article that I decided to look into was Music in Relation to Fashion 2000s, 2010s album cycles that impacted the modern fashion industry. And there was a major album impact, such as the albums like Mariah Carey's Rainbow and Gwen Stefani's Love Angels, Music Baby, and influenced DIY low rise jeans and 2000s fashions. There was also major cultural shifts where gender fluidity and cultural appropriation are seen in artists' fashion choices. Controversy from this is from cultural appropriation. For example, Gwen Stefani's use of Asian fashion elements. A lot of iconic styles popped up during this time, known as mainly from Evanescence and Lady Gaga are known for their eccentric and bold fashion, and Kanye West's Yeezus influences streetwear and athleisure trends. And there's also a nostalgic and global trends being more common, as we can see Lana Del Rey and Carly Rae Jepsen with an inspired nostalgic fashion, and BTS's blend of Korean and American streetwear impacting global fashion. Next off is the grunge effect, music, fashion, and the media during the rise of the grunge culture in the early 1990s. Its origin and rise, the first off, is grunge originated in Seattle and exploded into the mainstream in the early 90s. Its fashion and style, particularly, it emphasized authenticity, DIY aesthetics, and a rejection of societal expectations. And it also challenged traditional gender dynamics. Some iconic figures during this time was Kurt Cobain, Lane Staley, Chris Cornell were key artists during this time, and their tragic deaths significantly impacted the movement's legacy. And speaking of legacies, the grunge left a lasting impact on fashion and music and cultural attitudes towards authenticity and societal norms. And the last thing we got to talk about is comics and cartoons that comment on this topic. So this comic is known as the Generation Gap 2002. And some visual depictions of this, firstly, is the older character in the plain and moderate jeans, and the younger character in graphic t-shirts, backward gait baseball cap, and very baggy jeans. Some themes highlighted in this comic was it highlights the fashion differences between generations and showcases how generational identity is expressed through fashion trends. There's also the style and impact was that there's clean illustrations and clear text, and relatable and humorous, emphasizing cultural evolution. And it demonstrates the broader cultural shifts through fashion preferences. This next comic I like to call "Buy My Records," and the main theme that this comic talks about is it highlights the shift in music industry from traditional record sales into digital promotion. So the depictions made is that one musician begging for record sales, another is offering free music in exchange for promotional opportunities. Some key points highlighted is that it shows how artists use different strategies to attract listeners and reflects the decline of traditional sales in favor of digital sales and promotion, while also illustrating society's shift towards modern content consumption. A main style and impact that popped up was that there's a simple comparison to show changing dynamics, clear humor, and relatable scenarios, as well as underscores the trend of commercialization in music through digital marketing and consumer engagement. So, lastly, I want to talk about some of the challenges, successes, and something how is it applicable to the future. So, challenges. The main challenges I faced during the project were trying to find good evidence for my research question and properly connecting it back to the topic. Especially with certain categories that require a published research paper, it's very rare to find someone do research on the topic as niche as this, but it was still doable. Some successes. The most successful part of my research was probably finding such a 30-page article that strongly supported my research question and showed concrete findings in detail in a wide scale of genres while also still addressing the current times and shifts in fashion while identifying patterns in sales. And how is this applicable to the future? So this applies to me in the future because when I go to college and start doing more intensive professional research, the project will have given me experience to be confident to find the proper evidence and reasoning to support my thesis for any sort of medium I'm presenting my work, either presentation or essay. So, in conclusion, thank you for listening and thank you for your time.